You know, the media party says that Barack Obama is the smartest president ever. I mean, he was a Harvard professor. Sure, he says things like this.
Over the last 15 months, we've traveled to every corner of the United States. I've now been in 57 states. I think one left to go.
So that would mean there's 58 states, right? And then he said this.
There's a lot of, I don't know what the term is in Austrian, wheeling and dealing.
Beautiful language, Austrian. But he's not like that idiot George Bush, who alienated the entire Arab world and violated our civil liberties, right? Anyways, Obama has his own special problems, like the fact that unemployment today is higher than when he was first elected. In fact, not 1 minute has gone by since when he was elected that unemployment wasn't higher. And that hides an enormous fact that millions of Americans have simply stopped looking for work. So they're not even counted in the official unemployment rate. Let me tell you what that means. Before the recession began in 2008, 59.2% of young Americans, that is people under 25, were in the labor force. That means they were working or looking for work. Now that has plunged to 54.5%. So although America has grown in population in the past 5 years, there are nearly 2 million fewer young Americans even bothering to look for work. So the official unemployment rate for young Americans is about 16%. That's a staggeringly high number. But if you adjust for the number of young people who have simply given up ever finding a job, the U.S. youth unemployment rate is 23%. Seriously, that's pretty much the same as in European crisis countries. It is a jobless recovery down there, 5 years after the recession started. Sorry, you can't blame George Bush for that one. Now, Obama has never worked in the private sector. He was a community organizer, then very briefly a college professor, then straight into politics. He has no clue about how jobs are made in the real world. And he likes to trash talk those who dare to say they know how, if only the government would get out of the way. Remember this one?
If you were successful, somebody along the line gave you some help. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that we had that allowed you to thrive. Somebody invested in roads and bridges. If you got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
You didn't build that. See, in Obama's world, that's actually true. He has no clue how to make a job. In his world, jobs are either working for the government directly, as he always has, and as his wife always has, or they're the result of high-priced corporate lobbyists managing to access the government trough for some scheme. I mean, so many of those schemes, electric cars, solar panels, all of them disasters. $500 million lost on solar panel maker Solyndra alone. Telling Detroit to make cars that nobody wants to buy for political reasons, like the Chevy Volt. The guy has no clue. Well, and here's my point. A company from Canada called TransCanada has offered to create thousands of jobs, $7.6 billion worth of jobs, to be precise, to build a pipeline down from Canada's oil sands over to the Bakken oil fields in Saskatchewan and North Dakota, and then to bring that oil down to the Gulf Coast to Texas, where refineries are eager to receive it. Now, unlike Solyndra, no subsidies are needed. Unlike GM, no bailouts are needed. Really, all that's needed is for the U.S. government to get out of the way, and this Canadian company will build $7.6 billion worth of stuff. $7.6 billion worth of steel and concrete and salaries and expenses and trucks and hotel rooms and restaurants and accountants and whatever else you can imagine would go into a state-of-the-art pipeline connecting Alberta all the way with Texas. Now, TransCanada says it will create around 20,000 jobs to build the thing, and of course a smaller number to run and maintain the thing once it's built. I'm no expert. That sounds about right to me. I mean, that works out to about one job for every $250,000 TransCanada is going to spend. According to the U.S. Institute for Energy Research, by comparison, Obama's so-called green jobs, you know, wind turbines, solar panels, electric cars, that sort of thing, cost $26 billion in U.S. taxpayer money and created a grand total of 2,300 permanent jobs. So that cost $11.4 million per job for crap that nobody wants, for things that don't work without an ongoing subsidy. Now, in Saturday's New York Times, Obama trash-talked the Keystone Pipeline, saying the jobs that will be created by this pipeline aren't really that great. Here, let me quote him exactly. He said, quote, "Republicans have said that this would be a big jobs generator. There is no evidence that that's true. And my hope would be that any reporter who's looking at the facts would take the time to confirm that the most realistic estimates are this might create maybe 2,000 jobs during the construction of the pipeline, which might take a year or two. And then after that, we're talking about somewhere between 50 and 100 chuckles jobs in an economy of 150 million working people. The New York Times actually put in that word chuckles into their transcript of the interview. Obama was laughing at how few jobs would be created, as if 2,000 jobs were very little in construction, as if 100 permanent jobs were something to laugh at. And those are his numbers. Remember, they didn't build it, right? That's his speech. He didn't build that. Only Obama can build jobs by giving grants to solar panel companies. Now, I think I'll take TransCanada's word for how many workers it will take to build the pipeline, although the U.S. State Department has estimated it'll be more than 40,000. That's Obama's own State Department. But TransCanada, it's what they do for a living, and even if they're wrong, and Professor Obama, the expert in pipeline construction, was right, I mean, so what? Does America not need 2,000 more jobs? Forget 20,000 or 40,000. How about 2,000? And the laughable claim that only 50 or 100 maintenance and operating jobs would be permanent, again, even if that's right, so what? I mean, that's 50 or 100 more jobs than Obama has created with billions of wasted dollars. And the pipeline would be the #1 property taxpayer in most of the counties through which it passed. So it would support millions of Americans indirectly by contributing taxes to local governments. But it isn't the president's job to approve or disapprove of pipelines. It's not in the U.S. Constitution. The president isn't an expert in the subject. And even if he was, who cares? If it's a private company's money. The only reason why Obama has any say in this at all is that it crosses the Canada-U.S. border. And so the U.S. State Department has a say. Now, there are over 80 pipelines that cross the Canada-U.S. border right now. But this president is the first president to make an international incident out of regular commerce and to hold thousands of U.S. jobs hostage to rich environmental lobbyists. But here's the thing. The U.S. State Department has been studying this pipeline for close to 5 years. As far back as 2010, Hillary Clinton, then the Secretary of State, said she was inclined to approve it. It's been 2 years since the State Department issued a massive report saying the pipeline would have no significant environmental impact. They issued 10,000 pages saying that, and then a 2,000-page supplemental report. I should hope the pipelines are safe because they crisscross America like spider webs. If pipelines aren't safe, America would be a burning hulk right now, and of course it's not, despite the lusting of environmental extremists that it was. But put aside the jobs. We all agree it will create them by the thousand. Put aside the environment. We all agree that this pipeline is safe environmentally. I mean, the State Department has said so twice. They work for Obama. The U.S. currently imports almost half of its oil, and millions of barrels a day come from OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Venezuela. In fact, Venezuelan oil comes directly up to the Texas Gulf Coast, about 800,000 barrels a day, which is pretty much exactly the same number of barrels of oil that the Keystone XL pipeline would bring down from Canada and Bakken to replace that Venezuelan oil. I wonder if that's why Obama is truly opposed to this pipeline. It would put his third world anti-American buddies out of business, replacing foreign conflict oil with Canadian ethical oil. But look at what Obama said matters most to him. Not jobs, not foreign policy, but this from the New York Times, and I quote, "I'm going to evaluate this based on whether or not this is going to significantly contribute to carbon in our atmosphere. And there is no doubt that Canada, at the source in those tar sands, could potentially be doing more to mitigate carbon release," unquote. Oh, is that a fact? Well, here's a map of carbon emissions in North America. That little blue dot is the oil sands, about 42 megatons a year. The green dots are coal-fired power plants across Canada. And the red dots, looking like a petri dish gone crazy, are U.S. coal-fired power plants and their carbon emissions. If you care about dots on a chart, and apparently Obama does, what's the problem here? Is it that tiny blue dot? Or is it those red dots? Of course, both Canada and the U.S. have reduced their carbon emissions year after year. If you're worried about that sort of thing, if you're worried about carbon dioxide, a.k.a. plant food, but if you are worried, then shouldn't you be terrified of China, which is now by far the world's greatest emitter of CO2? And then there's India and Brazil and the OPEC countries. Say, has Obama ever blocked a trade deal or a treaty with those countries that are actually increasing their CO2? Not to mention real pollution? No, he has not. Not even with Venezuela, whose oil just happens to be as carbon intensive as Canada's oil sands oil. But this is all a laugh. Is there anyone out there who would look at America's source of oil imports, the terrorists of Saudi Arabia, the kleptocrats of Nigeria, the thugs of Venezuela, and say that the most pressing national interest for America, something so important that it will be set off against thousands of American jobs, is that OPEC conflict oil has a few puffs of CO2 less than Canadian oil sands oil, which isn't even true in the case of Venezuela? Is there any normal person who prefers to buy oil from terrorist central, aka the Middle East, than from Canada? Well, Obama thinks that way. This pipeline, first proposed in 2008, first studied by the U.S. in 2009, first approved in 2010 by the State Department, has now been delayed longer than it took the United States to fight and win the Second World War. And every day that it's delayed further isn't just another day of unemployment for thousands of Americans. It's another day that Barack Hussein Obama directs $100 a barrel to his friends in OPEC instead of his enemies in Canada.